Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Palestinian health officials say Israeli attacks have killed at least 39 people across the Gaza Strip over the past 24 hours. That includes 3 massive strikes on residential buildings in the Nuseirat refugee camp that survivors describe as feeling like an earthquake. Overnight, Israel continued attacks on tents and other shelters for displaced Palestinian civilians in Khan Yunis and al-Mawasi. Survivors say bodies of their loved ones were left unrecognizable by the airstrikes in an area Israel had designated as a so-called safe zone.
Do you see the rockets that fell on us and on the children at home? They were sleeping. We were sleeping deeply, only to get us out of the house like that. And we started running with the children at midnight. It is unfair and fair world.
Israel's released a jailed Gaza paramedic who survived a deadly attack on medical workers last month. Asad al-Nasrallah was among at least 10 Palestinians released from an Israeli prison into Gaza Tuesday, all of them in poor physical and psychological health after they reported being tortured. Al-Nasrallah was imprisoned without charge, held incommunicado for 37 days after he survived the March 23rd assault in which 15 of his fellow aid workers were killed by Israeli troops and buried in an unmarked mass grave, some of them bound and with gunshot wounds to the head and chest. Their ambulances and a fire truck were also buried nearby. President Trump signed executive orders Tuesday rolling back his previously imposed tariffs of 25% on cars, trucks, and automotive parts. Trump's reversal came as U.S. consumer confidence fell to its lowest level since the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt responded to reports that Amazon was planning to display the cost of tariff-related price increases alongside all Amazon products.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years?
Amazon later said it had no plans to show the cost of tariffs on its products. Several news outlets reported the apparent reversal came after Trump personally called Amazon founder Jeff Bezos Tuesday to complain. On Capitol Hill, House Republican leaders used procedural rules Tuesday to prevent Democrats from forcing votes on measures requesting information about Elon Musk's potential conflicts of interest, the impact of DOJ's cuts on states and local communities, the Trump administration's use of the consumer messaging app Signal, and more. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson dismissed the Democrats' resolutions of inquiry as, quote, political stunts and, quote, nonsensical waste of our time, unquote. On Monday, Michigan Democratic Congressmember Shri Thanedar filed an impeachment resolution against the president, citing Trump's, quote, sweeping abuse of power, flagrant violations of the Constitution, and acts of tyranny that undermine American democracy and threaten the rule of law, unquote. The impeachment resolution will be dead on arrival in the Republican-controlled House. Meanwhile, Democratic Congress members Pramila Jayapal and Debbie Dingell joined Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders Tuesday in reintroducing the Medicare for All Act, which would provide universal single-payer health care based on patient needs, not industry profits.
Legislation would provide comprehensive care to all Americans, rich, poor, young or old, with zero out-of-pocket expense. It would provide full freedom of choice regarding health care providers. You go to the doctor, the nurse that you want to. No more insurance premiums, no more deductibles, no more co-payments, no more filling out endless forms.
The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has agreed to rehire staffers on programs benefiting firefighters after the Health and Human Services Department canceled the World Trade Center Health Program, the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer, and more. That's according to the International Association of Firefighters, whose president won the concessions after weekend talks with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. However, the relief might be temporary, as many of the NAOSH programs still have termination dates scheduled for June. In more public health news, Mexico's reported a surge in measles cases in the border state of Chihuahua following an outbreak of the highly contagious vaccine-preventable disease in unvaccinated communities in Texas. Dr. Paul Offit, a Philadelphia pediatrician specializing in infectious diseases, says RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine misinformation is to blame.
Held press conferences about autism. He's held press conferences about food dyes. What he should do is hold a press conference every other day about this measles epidemic and what we're doing about it, and encourage vaccination, especially in areas where there's low vaccination rates. The opposite is happening. He doesn't say that. He gets in front of the public and says measles vaccine kills people every year.
In Oklahoma City, nearly 24 federal agents raided the wrong home and forced a mother and her 3 daughters, who are U.S. citizens, out of their house in their underwear in the rain, seizing their phones, laptops, and even their life savings. The agents supposedly were with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the FBI, and U.S. Marshals, and had a search warrant with the names of people who did not live in the house or have any connections to the family. The women had just moved to the Oklahoma home from Maryland with her family about 2 weeks before. She spoke to KFOR Oklahoma City after the raid.
What if I would have been armed? What if you're breaking in? What am I supposed to think? My initial thought is we were being robbed. My daughter's female daughter's being kidnapped.
Nothing but likely lifelong trauma.
We have guns pointed at our faces. Can you just reprogram yourself and see us as humans?
It is unclear agents from which department raided the home. This comes as Trump's Justice Department directed ICE to carry out raids and home searches without a warrant, invoking the centuries-old Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which has been used to target Venezuelan immigrants wrongfully accused of being in the Tren de Aragua gang. In related news, rights groups are raising alarm over reports ICE is targeting unaccompanied immigrant children in raid operations nationwide, seeking to criminally prosecute and deport them. One critic of the policy described it as backdoor family separation. A New Jersey federal judge has ruled against the Trump administration's attempts to dismiss a federal lawsuit brought by jailed Columbia University graduate Mahmoud Khalil, arguing the U.S. government's illegally detaining him for his political views. The court rejected Trump's attempts to shut down the case before even granting Khalil a hearing. Judge Michael Fabiars previously found his court could retain jurisdiction over Khalil's federal case, which could potentially impact other similar cases as Trump's State Department seeks to deport other international students and recent graduates over their support of Palestinian rights. In related news, a federal appeals court has temporarily paused the transfer of Tufts University international graduate student Ramesa Ozturk from an ICE detention center in Louisiana to Vermont. Arguments on that case are scheduled for next week. Columbia University student Palestinian activist Masan Madawi has spoken out from a Vermont prison where he's been detained since his arrest earlier this month. In an interview with Vermont Public Radio, Madawi quoted Dr. Martin Luther King's admonition that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
And the injustice that I am facing here and the injustice that the anti-war movement is facing is also connected to the injustice that the Palestinian people are going through. We're talking about 55,000 people who have been killed. We see children being killed, amputated, losing their parents, no homes. This is what's moving us.
A hearing in Madawi's case is scheduled for today, where a judge could decide whether to release him from Northwest State Correctional Facility in St. Albans-town, Vermont. Madawi is a green card holder from Palestine who was born and raised in a refugee camp in the West Bank. He was arrested in Vermont when he appeared for what he was told would be a naturalization test. He came to the U.S. over a decade ago and began attending Columbia University in 2021, where he became a key organizer in peaceful pro-Palestine campus protests. He headed the Columbia Buddhist Association. President Trump has fired some of former President Biden's nominees to the board that oversees the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Among those fired is Doug Emhoff, the husband of former Vice President Kamala Harris, who was appointed to a 5-year term on the board in January. In a statement, Emhoff wrote, quote, "Holocaust remembrance and education should never be politicized. To turn one of the worst atrocities in history into a wedge issue is dangerous," unquote. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declared Tuesday he was proud to have dismantled a program that boosts the participation of women in military teams. Writing on Elon Musk's social media site X, Hegseth blasted the Pentagon's Women, Peace and Security Initiative as, quote, "a United Nations program pushed by feminists and left-wing activists. Politicians fawn over it. Troops hate it," Hegseth wrote. He said it was a Biden-era program. In fact, the program was created by a bill President Trump signed into law in 2017 that was celebrated by Trump's daughter and former advisor, Ivanka Trump. It was also supported by, at the time, Kristi Noem and now Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Renowned Colombian journalist Gineth Bedoya, who was abducted, sexually assaulted, and tortured by paramilitaries in 2000 while she was on assignment reporting on Colombia's U.S.-backed war, has dropped her case after a quarter of a century fighting for justice. Bedoya wrote on social media, quote, "The impunity in my case will go down in Colombia's history. My work as a journalist will continue," she said. Democracy Now! Spoke to Bedoya in The Hague in 2015.
To go publicly and say that you've been a victim of sexual violence changes your life forever. Because we live in a very machista world in which they tell you that you're guilty for your rape. But I realized that if I didn't speak, other women wouldn't be able to either. And I feel like having spoken out has changed the life for many women in Colombia.
International press freedom and human rights groups had for years pressured the Colombian government to fully investigate Bedoya's case and prosecute those involved. In 2021, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruled the Colombian government was responsible for Bedoya's kidnapping, rape, and torture. And a senior Pakistani official says there's credible intelligence that India intends to launch a military strike on Pakistan within the next 24 hours. The warning came 1 week after gunmen massacred 26 tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir in a rampage that India blamed on Pakistan. Tensions between the two nuclear-armed countries are now at their highest point since 2019, when India carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan for the first time since 1971. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.